What could a dying veteran possibly say in a courtroom that would leave even Judge Caprio silent? Not just silent in thought, but silent in a way that froze everyone, the lawyers, the audience, even the cameras capturing it all. Friends, picture this: a typical morning in Providence Municipal Court. The usual shuffling of papers, the murmurs of people waiting their turn, the bailiff calling names from the docket. And then an elderly man in a faded military jacket steps forward. His gait is slow, deliberate. His face carries the lines of decades lived, battles fought, and losses endured. At first, nothing seems unusual. Judge Caprio greets him with the same warmth he offers everyone who stands before his bench. A traffic violation. A small fine. The kind of case that usually takes 5 minutes at most. But then, the man clears his throat. His voice is low, roughened by age and something heavier, something unsaid. "Your Honor," he begins softly, "I don't have much time left." The courtroom shifts. A woman in the back stops scrolling her phone. A lawyer lowers his pen. Even Judge Caprio tilts his head slightly, sensing something different in the man's tone. The veteran continues, each word carrying a weight that presses on the room. "Before I go," he says, "there's something I need to say." And suddenly the air changes. Because everyone realizes this isn't about a ticket anymore. People lean forward in their seats. A man near the front folds his arms tightly across his chest, as if bracing himself. The court reporter's fingers hover above her keyboard, waiting, knowing these words might matter more than any legal record she's ever typed. The veteran pauses, looking down at his trembling hands. His silence is louder than anything spoken before it. Then he lifts his head, eyes glistening, and begins to speak again, slowly, deliberately. What he says next will make grown men stare at the floor, fighting emotion. It will leave Judge Caprio himself unable to respond right away. Because when a man who has carried the weight of war, loss, and life itself chooses his final words, people listen. Friends, you won't believe what happened after this. To understand the moment fully, you have to know the man sitting at the bench that day. Judge Frank Caprio was more than just a figure in a black robe. For decades, people across the country had come to admire him as the compassionate judge, the man whose courtroom was as much about humanity as it was about law. He was known for listening, truly listening, to the people who stood before him. In a world where courts often felt cold and impersonal, Judge Caprio's court felt different. His mornings usually began the same way: a stack of cases, a room full of people, and the quiet hum of anticipation as each name was called. Traffic tickets, parking fines, small civil disputes, the kinds of cases that kept the court busy but rarely made headlines. Spectators often filled the seats, some curious about the process, others hoping to witness one of those moments Judge Caprio had become known for. Moments where law met mercy, where compassion turned an ordinary case into something unforgettable. That day began no differently. The clerk read out names, one after another. People shuffled forward nervously, made their cases, paid their fines, or sometimes left smiling when Judge Caprio showed leniency. And then they called the next name. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Just another case on the docket. Heads turned as an older man stepped slowly toward the front. He wore a simple jacket, its fabric worn at the elbows, with a small row of military ribbons pinned neatly on the chest. His hair was thin and silver, his face weathered by years most people in the room could only imagine. Yet there was a dignity in the way he carried himself, his back straight despite his age, his steps measured even though they were slow. People shifted in their seats as he approached the podium. There was no lawyer at his side, no family members trailing behind. He had come alone. Judge Caprio looked up from the paperwork in front of him. He greeted the man the way he greeted everyone, warmly, with respect. "Good morning, sir," he said. The man nodded slightly. "Good morning, Your Honor." His voice was steady but soft, the kind of voice that made people lean in to hear more clearly. The clerk began reading the details of the case, a minor violation, the kind that usually took only a few minutes to resolve. But even before the clerk finished, there was something about the man's presence that told everyone this wasn't going to be routine. He stood there calmly, hands resting on the podium, eyes lowered as though gathering his thoughts. Behind him, the quiet murmur of the courtroom faded. People noticed the small details, the way his jacket sleeves hung a little loose on his thin arms, the way his shoes were polished though clearly old, the faint tremor in his left hand as he clasped it over the right. This was no ordinary defendant. Even Judge Caprio seemed to sense it. He glanced up again, studying the man for a moment longer than usual before speaking. "Sir," he said kindly, "is there anything you'd like to tell me before we begin?" The man lifted his eyes then. They were clear but heavy, like someone carrying a story too big to fit into a few sentences. And though no one in the room realized it yet, what he was about to share would leave the entire courtroom silent. The man cleared his throat, his eyes still lowered, as though he was arranging thoughts that had been waiting years to be spoken aloud. When he finally began, his voice was calm, steady, but there was something beneath it, something the courtroom felt even if they couldn't name it yet. "Your Honor," he said quietly, "I served this country for more than 20 years. That single sentence changed the air in the room. Heads lifted. A few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Even those who had come only to pay fines or watch proceedings felt the weight behind the words. Judge Caprio nodded slowly. 20 years, he repeated softly. That's a lifetime of service. The man gave the faintest shrug as though dismissing his own sacrifice. Army, he added simply. 3 tours overseas. There was no boast in his tone, no prideful lifting of the chin. He said it the way some people might mention where they grew up or what they had for breakfast, like facts that didn't need embellishment. Judge Caprio leaned forward slightly. And now you're here, over a parking ticket? The man allowed himself the smallest smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. Seems strange, doesn't it? He murmured. A ripple of quiet laughter moved through the courtroom, but it was brief, uneasy. Something about his tone carried too much gravity to let the moment lighten completely. He continued before anyone else could speak. When I came back the last time, he said slowly, things were different. He paused, searching for words. Different for me. For my family. Judge Caprio didn't interrupt. He had learned long ago that silence often gave people permission to say what they needed to say. The man's fingers tapped lightly against the podium before going still again. Work was hard to find, he said. The things I'd seen, the things I carried back with me, they didn't exactly fit into everyday life. He didn't elaborate, but he didn't need to. The faint tremor in his hand, the careful way he formed each sentence, it told the story on its own. People in the courtroom leaned forward now, sensing this was leading somewhere unexpected. And now, the man said finally, I've got this ticket. A fine I can't pay right now. He let out a breath. But that's not really why I came. The judge tilted his head. No. The man shook his head slowly. No, Your Honor. There's something else I need to say. Something I need to leave behind before. He stopped there, letting the sentence hang, unfinished but heavy with meaning. The room went utterly still. Whatever this man was carrying, it was clear now, it was bigger than any parking fine. The veteran stood there for a long moment, shoulders squared, eyes lowered, as though he was gathering strength before peeling back the layers of his life in front of strangers. When he finally spoke again, his words came slowly, measured, like he was handing them over carefully because each one cost him something. After I came back, he said, I thought things would get better. That's what you tell yourself over there when the days get too long. You say, one day I'll be home. One day I'll be safe. One day it'll be normal again. He paused, his eyes fixed on some point on the floor. But normal doesn't come back. Not the way you remember it. The courtroom was silent except for the faint hum of the lights overhead. The veteran took a slow breath. Work wasn't steady. Bills piled up. My wife, she tried to hold everything together, but I wasn't the same man who left. I was angry, quiet, tired in a way sleep didn't fix. He stopped again, this time looking up at Judge Caprio briefly before dropping his gaze once more. We argued more. Then one day she left. Took the kids with her. I don't blame her. The words landed heavy. A woman in the second row shifted uncomfortably, biting her lip. Someone else looked down at the floor as if giving the man privacy even in the middle of the crowded room. The veteran cleared his throat. After that, it was just me. I moved into a small apartment. Took whatever work I could find. Some days it was warehouse shifts. Other days it was fixing fences, patching roofs. Anything to keep the lights on. He gripped the podium tighter, his knuckles pale. But then the doctor said something was wrong with my lungs. All those years around burn pits, chemicals. I guess it catches up to you. A murmur ran through the back of the courtroom but faded quickly. They say it's serious, he continued softly. That's what brought me here today, I guess. The tickets, the bills, they keep coming. But the time doesn't. Those words lingered like smoke in the air. Judge Caprio leaned back slightly, his face unreadable but his eyes heavy. The veteran pressed on, voice cracking for the first time. I used to be able to handle things. No matter how bad it got, I could work longer, sleep less, push through. But now, I get winded just walking up the stairs. Some mornings I wake up and wonder if it's worth paying the rent when the doctors aren't sure how long. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Someone in the back dabbed at their eyes. Even the clerk who had been shuffling papers earlier now sat motionless, hands folded in her lap. The veteran's next words came out softer, like he was speaking to himself as much as anyone else. I don't want pity. That's not why I came. I don't want to leave without saying some things that matter. Before it's too late. The weight of it settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Judge Caprio nodded slowly but didn't speak yet. He seemed to sense there was more coming, something deeper, heavier, waiting to break through the man's measured calm. And he was right. Because the veteran wasn't finished. Not yet. The hardest part of his story was still to come. The veteran gripped the podium with both hands, his shoulders rising and falling as if the air itself had grown heavier. He stared down at his calloused fingers for a long time before finally lifting his gaze to meet Judge Caprio's eyes. Your Honor, he said softly, the doctors told me last month, it's terminal. A ripple of shock moved through the courtroom. It wasn't loud, no gasps, no murmurs, just the collective stillness of people caught off guard by words they hadn't expected to hear. The man continued, his voice steady but faint, like he was speaking from far away. They said 6 months. Maybe less. That was before the last scan. Now they're not sure. Even the court reporter had stopped typing. Her hands rested frozen above the keyboard, as though afraid to break the silence. The veteran drew a shaky breath. I've spent most of my life serving this country. I miss birthdays, anniversaries, first steps, first words. I gave all the years I had, thinking I'd have time later to make it right. He shook his head slowly. But there's no more later now. A woman in the back row pressed a tissue to her mouth. The bailiff shifted his weight, his usually stern face softened by something unspoken. The veteran's eyes dropped again. My kids, they don't really talk to me anymore. Can't say I blame them. Their childhoods were filled with empty chairs at dinner tables, letters instead of hugs. I thought I was doing it for them. For all of us. But somewhere along the way I think I lost them. He swallowed hard before continuing. And now here I am, standing in front of you over a parking ticket I can't even pay. And maybe that doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things. Maybe nothing I say today changes anything. But before I go, I just want someone to hear me. Really hear me. He looked around the courtroom then, at the strangers, the clerks, the judge watching him with that steady, unreadable expression. I don't want pity. I don't want speeches. I don't need a parade or a folded flag. His voice cracked slightly on the next words. I just want to leave this world knowing I was more than my mistakes. That somewhere, in the middle of all the things I got wrong, I did some good. The courtroom had grown so quiet that even the hum of the lights seemed to fade. The veteran's next words came slower, as though they cost him something to speak. When I was overseas, he said, we used to talk about the end sometimes. About what we'd want if it came. Most guys wanted big funerals, guns fired in the air, the whole thing. He paused, shaking his head faintly. I used to say I just wanted to go quietly. No drama. No speeches. Just peace. He exhaled, the sound rough, uneven. Now I think about it differently. I don't want quiet. I want someone to remember me. Not the soldier. Not the mistakes. Me. The man who tried. The man who loved his family even when he didn't know how to show it. A tear slid down his cheek then, unhidden, unashamed. I came here today, he said, voice barely above a whisper now, because this is my last court date. My last anything really. I don't have time for another. And I didn't want to leave without saying this out loud. Without someone knowing I was here, that I mattered. The words hung in the air like a bell that wouldn't stop ringing. Even Judge Caprio, known for his warmth and steady composure, seemed at a loss. His hands rested motionless on the bench. His eyes glistened in the harsh courtroom light. The veteran straightened slowly, his breath uneven but his voice calm. That's all I wanted to say, Your Honor. I'm ready for whatever comes next. And with that the room went utterly still. No one spoke. No one moved. It felt like the whole world had paused to honor the last words of a soldier who had given everything, and asked for nothing in return. For a long moment after the veteran finished, Judge Caprio didn't speak. His hands were folded on the bench, his eyes fixed on the man standing before him. The judge had seen thousands of cases, heard every excuse imaginable, every story under the sun. But this was different. Finally, Judge Caprio leaned forward slightly, his voice softer than anyone had ever heard it. Sir, he began slowly, I want you to know something. He paused, his words deliberate as though he didn't want to waste a single one. What you've just shared, it matters. You matter. The veteran lowered his gaze, shoulders tense as though he hadn't expected kindness. Judge Caprio continued, his tone steady but heavy with emotion. This courtroom isn't just about laws and fines. It's about people. Real lives. And yours, he shook his head slowly, yours is a life this city should be grateful for. He glanced at the paperwork in front of him, the ticket, the fine, the meaningless details compared to what the man had just laid bare. Then he looked back at the veteran. I'm dismissing this case, he said clearly, his voice ringing through the silent room. Every fine, every charge, it's gone. Wiped clean. You will leave here today owing nothing to this court. A soft gasp rippled through the audience. Someone in the back murmured, thank God. But Judge Caprio wasn't finished. He leaned forward again, eyes locked on the veteran. And more than that, he added, this city owes you a debt. One we can never repay. But today we can start by showing you the respect you've earned. The bailiff shifted, eyes glistening as Judge Caprio spoke on. I want someone from the veteran's office here by this afternoon. Make sure this man gets whatever help he needs. Housing. Medical. Whatever it takes. No veteran should stand alone in this courtroom or anywhere else. The veteran blinked hard, his jaw tightening as though holding back emotion. Judge Caprio's voice softened even further. You said you wanted to be remembered. Well, sir, everyone in this room will remember you. Not for your mistakes but for your courage. For your service. For the way you carried yourself today. Someone in the audience began to clap softly, hesitantly, as though unsure if it was allowed. Then another joined. And another. Within seconds the entire room was on its feet, the applause rolling through the courtroom like a wave. The veteran stood motionless, his head bowed slightly, his hands gripping the podium as though steadying himself against the emotion in the room. Judge Caprio waited for the noise to quiet before speaking one last time. Go in peace, sir, he said softly. You've done enough. More than enough. Let the rest be on us. The gavel fell softly, not as a punishment, but like a closing chapter written with respect rather than judgment. As the applause slowly faded, the courtroom remained wrapped in a kind of reverent silence, the kind that lingers after something sacred has just unfolded. The veteran stepped back from the podium, his eyes lowered, shoulders heavy but somehow lighter than when he'd arrived. Judge Caprio sat for a moment longer, his hands resting on the bench as if he wasn't ready to move on just yet. Around the room, people wiped their eyes, some openly crying, others simply sitting quietly as though words might cheapen what they had witnessed. Moments like this don't come often. Courtrooms are places of rules and fines and legal language, but that day it became something else entirely. A place where the weight someone had carried for years was finally set down, where mercy and compassion overshadowed laws and penalties. This veteran hadn't asked for pity. He hadn't even asked for forgiveness. All he wanted was to be remembered as more than his mistakes, as more than the battles he'd lost. And maybe that's why the entire room, strangers, clerks, lawyers, even the bailiff, sat frozen for a moment after he left, each person carrying the same thought. Isn't that what we all want? To matter. To leave something behind beyond the things we got wrong. Judge Caprio didn't just dismiss a fine that day. He gave a man his dignity back. He gave him a moment where the world stopped and said, your life meant something. Friends, maybe that's the lesson we carry forward. We pass people every day whose stories we will never hear. The quiet man on the bus, the tired woman in the checkout line, the veteran waiting at a crosswalk. How many of them carry battles we can't see? How many wait for someone, anyone, to look at them the way Judge Caprio looked at that man and say, I see you? The veteran walked out of that courtroom with no fines left to pay. But what Judge Caprio gave him was worth far more than money. He gave him respect. He gave him peace. He gave him proof that even at the end he had been heard. As the crowd slowly left, some stopped to shake the veteran's hand. Others simply nodded with quiet respect. No one rushed. No one spoke loudly. It was as though they all knew they had seen something fragile, something that demanded silence instead of noise. Judge Caprio stayed on the bench for a moment after the room emptied, staring at the door where the veteran had walked out. Maybe he was thinking about all the cases he'd seen over the years, all the names and faces that had passed through his courtroom. Maybe he knew this one would never fade. Because some stories stay with you long after the gavel falls. Friends, what would you have said to this man if you had been there? Would you have thanked him for his service? Told him his life mattered? Or maybe you would have stood quietly because sometimes words aren't enough. Tell us in the comments. Share what you would have said. Because maybe someone carrying their own battles will read your words and feel a little less alone. And if this story touched you, if it made you pause for even a moment, share it. Share it so others remember the cost of service, the weight of silence, and the power of compassion in a world that moves too fast. The veteran didn't ask for much. Just to be remembered. Maybe that's what we all should carry forward. The reminder that behind every face we pass is a story we don't know, a battle we can't see, a life that still wants to matter. As the courtroom emptied that day, the applause had faded, but the feeling lingered: respect, sorrow, gratitude, all woven together in the quiet aftermath of a soldier's final words. And in our next episode, friends, another case left Judge Caprio speechless. A moment so powerful it brought the entire courtroom to its feet. Don't miss it.